Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Parsha class Sunday morning. We took a little break last week and the week before we did Purim, and we're back to the portion of the week. This week is the portion of Shmini. Shmini is the third portion of the book of Leviticus. As I always do, we'll go quickly through the content of what's in this portion, and then we'll zero in on one topic. So this is a direct continuation of yesterday's portion last week, which discussed the dedication or the inauguration of the Tabernacle. You'll remember the Jewish people were commanded to build a Mishkan, the Tabernacle in the desert, a place where God would converge with the Jewish people and rest His presence, be present there. That's the place where He would communicate with Moses. And once it was finished and concluded and built, he asked that the instruction was that for 7 days they should inaugurate the temple, which means they put it up and dismantle it every day. And they would do this different services there, the sacrifices, all different types of sacrificial offerings. And then on the 8th day, which is the beginning of this portion, Vayihi Bayom HaShmini, it was on the 8th day that that Moses called Aaron and his sons, and he officially inaugurated them and installed them into their positions as the high priest and the regular priests. And he also called upon the Leviim, the Levites, and he inaugurated them and installed them into their positions, which is to serve in the temple as well. And that too necessitated a number of offerings that the Kohanim, that the priests brought, and a number of offerings Aaron and his sons brought, and there was all kinds of rituals that were done to install them all and to install the Leviim. For example, one of the instructions was, and some people don't realize this, how extraordinary this was. God told Moses that part of the inauguration of the Leviim, and by the way, there were 22,000 Leviim. And one of the ways that they were going to be inaugurated was to lift them each. To lift them up and wave them back and forth. Literally, to lift up the body and wave them and put them down. And they did that. Who did that? Moses and Aaron did that. 22,000 people in one day. You know what, you talk about going to the gym. I mean, that's one heck of an exercise. That's a workout. But that's what they did. And the temple was inaugurated. The presence of God came into the temple, to the tabernacle, to the Mishkan, and it was a glorious, you can only imagine. I just want to describe to you what and put it in context, because what happened was, the whole building of the tabernacle was to atone for the sin of the golden calf. What happened as a result of the golden calf was that God's presence was removed from the Jewish people. At Sinai, when God gave the Torah, He revealed Himself to the Jewish people in the most extraordinary way. And the plan was that He would be there with them. He would be there constantly. But when a short 40 days later they created the calf and they worshipped it and so on, He removed His presence, and Moses had to ask Hashem for mercy and bring Him back among the Jewish people. And the compromise, so to say, was that He would have a temple and the tabernacle, and that's where He would be present. And if a Jew wanted to have a closeness to God and a communication with God, he would go to the temple. And that's where he would meet God. But it was no longer going to be among the Jewish people, each in their tent and wherever they were. Okay. So now the temple is built. And the temple was the physical manifestation or the sign that their sin was atoned for. Because God's back among them. So you can imagine the joy and the excitement around the inauguration of the temple. And indeed, it was an awesome day. It was on the 8th day of the inauguration when all these offerings were brought. It happened to be the first day of Nisan, almost just 2 weeks short of the first anniversary of the Exodus, when they would celebrate Pesach. And this is, the exhilaration was incredible. But then a terrible, terrible thing happens. In the excitement of the moment, Aaron had 4 sons. Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar. Nadav and Avihu, the 2 sons of Aaron, those 2 went into the temple as the Torah describes it and offered a strange or foreign offering. What is a foreign offering? A foreign offering means one that you weren't commanded to do. They went into the Holy of Holies and brought that offering. And the Torah tells us that the tragedy struck and they both passed away in the Holy of Holies. Could you imagine on the day of this incredible, exciting, uplifting, and great moment, this terrible thing happens to Aaron. Now, usually, the law is that someone whose close relative dies, parent, a sibling, a child, a spouse, if any of these people pass away, that first day you're considered an onan. And an onan has certain restrictions. And one of the restrictions is that they're not allowed to bring offerings or eat their sacrifices. Because they're in a state of, mourning, intense mourning. It's not compatible with eating sacrifices. But God told Moses to tell Aaron that he shouldn't move from the temple. The daily service of the inauguration should continue as usual, and not to interrupt the joy and jubilant nature of the moment. And that regarding the tragedy, the rest of the Jewish people will mourn the loss of these 2 great men, but Aaron and his other 2 sons should continue to serve in the temple that day of their inauguration. Now, first of all, the tragedy itself was bad enough, and Moses tried to comfort Aaron. And one of the things he told Aaron was that you should know that the reason God took your 2 sons in a moment like this was because of their holiness, and he gave him a whole explanation. And Aaron accepted. He was silent, it says. He just was silent. He didn't question. He didn't complain. He accepted the decree. Now, before I elaborate more on the story, let me just finish the portion, then I'll elaborate a little more on that. Anyway, so the Torah records that they were taken out of the temple because they were dead by their cousins. The 2 cousins went in and took them out, and they were buried, and the inauguration of the temple continued. Then the very next thing we read is that God instructs Aaron. Doesn't even go through Moses. This time he speaks directly to Aaron as reward for his accepting the decree and not challenging God. God speaks to Aaron, and he tells him that he shouldn't ever go into the temple intoxicated. If he drinks wine, he should not go into the temple. And we learn from this also that a sage, a judge, should not give a ruling when he's intoxicated. And if they do, they will die. That's a very big offense. And the next thing we read is about a story, an interesting argument that happened between Moses and Aaron regarding certain sacrifices of the temple, which I'll discuss soon, because I want to zero in on that. Aaron said that we shouldn't eat a certain sacrifice. Moses said you should, and you got angry at Aaron for not eating it. And Aaron explained his position, and Moshe accepted, and he admitted that he was wrong. Quite an interesting incident for a leader to admit that he's wrong. Not bad. I wish we had leaders like that. But next thing happens. That ends the topic of the inauguration of the temple. It occupies half the portion. The second half of the portion discusses the laws of kashrut. What a Jew is allowed to eat, what kind of animal meat he's allowed to eat, what kind of meat he's not allowed to eat, what kind of fowl he's allowed to eat and not, what kind of fish one is permitted to eat and what kind of fish is not permitted to eat, crawling animals and creeping animals, and all it goes through everything, what the Jewish diet is made up of, what you're not allowed to eat, what we call today treif. And it's a long discussion. And at the very end of the portion, it talks about the laws of ritual defilement. When a person becomes ritually defiled, when he doesn't become ritually defiled, or at least some of the laws of the ritual defilement. And that concludes the portion. So it's a busy portion. But now I want to go and discuss this incident that happens in the temple and the aftermath and the ensuing argument between Moses and Aaron. There's a lot at play over here. What is Moses and Aaron arguing about? So let me go back and give you the particulars. What happened over here? That day was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It was the first of Nisan. On Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it was the day that God told Moses to inaugurate the temple, as I mentioned. As part of the inaugural rituals was to bring a series of offerings, which are in addition to the regular offerings that are brought every day in the temple. And in the case of the Rosh Chodesh, you know that there's a Musaf service, right? We do Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. What's Musaf? Musaf means the additional. What's the addition? The additional sacrifice. The additional sacrifice that you bring on Rosh Chodesh is a goat. You bring a goat for the Musaf offering. But you bring more than a goat. You bring 7 sheep. It's a whole series of offerings that you bring on Rosh Chodesh. So let me tell it to you the way it is. Every day in the temple, the community brought 2 burnt offerings. 2 sheep, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. It's called the Korban Tamid, the daily continual offering. That every single day of the year without exception. Those sacrifices were not eaten. They were considered ascent offerings or an olah. An olah is an offering that is completely burnt on the altar. You don't need any part of it. On Rosh Chodesh, they also bring a few sheep, some sheep, that are also considered olah offerings, and they are burnt on the altar. But there's one goat that's brought as a sin offering on Rosh Chodesh. And that goat you do eat, or parts of it. You don't burn all of it, you burn certain parts of it, but the bulk of it is eaten by the Kohanim. It's a sin offering that you bring once a month on behalf of the whole community. It is regarding that. It is regarding that goat that Moshe and Aaron have an argument. Now, on this day, it was, as I mentioned, the inauguration of the temple. The inauguration of the temple required a bunch of offerings. And some of those offerings were also sin offerings and offerings that the Kohanim were supposed to eat. Right?
Sin offering.
Yeah, there was the ones that are burnt entirely on the altar, not, but the sin offering, the peace offering, those are eaten. And God instructed Moses that because we're dealing with the inauguration of the temple, it's a day of joy for the Jewish people, even though Aaron is now in the midst of a personal tragedy of the worst kind of tragedy that happened, he should not interrupt the inauguration of the temple. That takes precedence. And therefore, even though an onan, someone that is in this period of intense mourning, the day of a person's relative's death, he's not allowed to eat a sacrificial meat. Yet God told him that he should continue the offerings of the days, the inauguration. He should eat the meat of that offering. He should not mourn. He should continue as usual. Got it? So there was no question that the offerings that were brought specifically for the or inauguration of the day that Aaron was supposed to continue and eat that meat, and he did. But Aaron did not eat the meat of that goat for Rosh Chodesh. That he burned completely, which is what you do with the meat, sacrificial meat that you're not allowed to eat. You burn it. And he argued that I'm not allowed to eat the meat of that goat because I'm in a state of intense mourning. Moshe sees that the goat was burnt. He gets very upset. I told you to eat the sacrifice. Don't you're not in mourning today. Make sense? What does Aaron tell him? What does Aaron tell him? Aaron tells him, you're right, I'm not supposed to mourn the inauguration of the temple. And therefore any sacrifice that is specifically and directly related to the inauguration of the temple, I'm going to eat, as per God's instructions. But the Rosh Chodesh offering, that's not connected to the inauguration of the temple. That's brought every month. That's brought every month, and it's irrespective of the inauguration. And therefore, who says that I'm allowed to eat that meat? That meat has nothing to do with their inauguration. That meat I'm not allowed to eat. In other words, God made a dispensation for the inauguration, but not for the other sacrifices of the day, which have nothing to do with the inauguration. See, he argued, I'm not going to be an onan, or I'm not going to. In other words, he said the status of a person who was in this intense mourning because of a relative that died that day are canceled for the offerings of the inauguration, but not all the other offerings that have nothing to do with the inauguration, and therefore I don't think I'm allowed to eat that, and that's why I burnt it. And lo and behold, Moshe looks at him and says, you know, Aaron, I got upset, but I had no right to get upset. You are right. And he came to, and he admits his mistake. It's a fascinating story. But there's a lot that lies here. Yeah, go ahead.
Why are we killing God's creatures as sacrifices? How does that?
Now, do we kill God's creatures to eat steak?
That we do.
Yes.
Why
you
do
don't
we
have.
kill
Did you?
sacrifice?
Why don't you ask? Why do we kill God's creatures to eat a steak?
We have to survive.
So the temple is also part of that. In other words, if you like, the question is not why we're killing God's creatures. In other words, everyone agrees that you're allowed to kill God's creature for man's survival. So we're not bothered by killing animals for our own survival. First, you could survive on other things. You don't need to eat meat. God created the world in a certain way where every part of creation has to be utilized in the service of God. And the animal kingdom is the animal life, so to say, is included in God's service this way, through sacrifices, through eating it and making a bracha on it, and becoming part of the human. I always say this, you put on tefillin every morning, right? You put on tefillin?
Sometimes.
Some people put it every day, some people put it on sometimes. Would you think it's fair that an animal shouldn't be able to put on tefillin? Why only a human could put on tefillin and not an animal?
And non-Jews also.
Right. Why should an animal not be? So humans put on tefillin. The Jew puts on tefillin for the human race. What about an animal? How does an animal put on tefillin? He doesn't, right? Did you ever see someone wrap a tefillin around a cow's leg? No, because you're not allowed to. But it's really unfair that an animal shouldn't be part of such an incredible mitzvah. The animal would also like to be part of the service of God. So God tells you, you're right. Let me tell you how to do that. Eat the animal, and the next morning you'll put on tefillin. The cow put on tefillin. That's how a cow puts on tefillin. That's how a cow is connected to God. When it becomes human, and a human does a mitzvah, now the cow did a mitzvah.
I think the
and the vegetable did a mitzvah. And everything has got to be part of God's service. The way that's done is you elevate every part of creation to the next part. The mineral becomes elevated to the vegetable. The vegetable becomes elevated to the animal, and the animal becomes elevated to the state of the human, and the human becomes one with God through a mitzvah. In that way, all of creation has become part of the world of Hashem.
And now we're no longer doing these sacrifices.
So we eat meat, and we serve God through eating of meat in a Shabbos
we're not
meal.
sacrificing
We're not.
animals
You're
to
right.
God anymore.
You're right. We don't have the temple anymore. That's why.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What is the meaning of tefillin when you put it on? What is it supposed to represent? I mean, I'm not familiar with that.
I'll explain that after. I'll tell you right after the class. Let's focus on this class.
Okay.
I'll answer the question about film, and it's meant basically to connect your intellect and your emotions to Hashem. But I'll elaborate a little more later.
So in other words, it brings you closer to God.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, not only all parts of you. So back to the story of Aaron and his sons, and the argument that he has with Moshe. The sages tell us an interesting thing. This little incident and this argument between Moshe and Aaron regarding the Rosh Chodesh goat is not just a story about a goat. It really relates to the human experience. It's an argument about the human experience and his relationship with God. How so? Let me explain. Our sages tell us that Moses and Aaron represent two distinct or maybe even opposite attributes. Moshe is known as Moshe Emes, the Torah say Emes. Moses is identified with Emes, truth. Aaron is identified with what? With peace. Aaron, the Mishnah says, you should be of the students of Aaron. Ohev Sholem, a man who loves peace. Bereidev Sholem, he pursues peace, and so on. Told, so what's the difference between truth and peace? You can say they're two opposites. What is truth? Let's understand objective truth. When you say that something is true, truth is truth all the way till the end, right? There's no relative truth. This truth is truth. So, for example, you come before a rabbi, and the two litigants come before a rabbi, before Moses, who's a truth seeker. And they're arguing about $1,000. I owe you, you owe me, I don't owe you. They're arguing about $1,000. You got to come to the truth. So what would some rabbis do, or some people do? Say, listen guys, calm down everyone. Let's make a compromise. Give him $500 and call it a day. You work something out. You work, what do they call it? When lawyers try to avoid court,
Mediate.
they mediate and they come to a settlement. They settle it out of court. How do they settle it? The one that's claiming the money doesn't get everything he's claiming. The one that's denying the claims doesn't get it. Doesn't he has to pay something, and that's how it works, right? You go away with something. This guy's happy, that guy's happy, or both are unhappy, whatever. But it's a happy medium. Did they get to the truth? Is that called getting to the truth? Compromise is the very opposite of truth when you think about it, when you analyze it. It makes for peace. It creates a peaceful atmosphere because they're no longer fighting and they're going home. Everyone's happy. This guy got something. He didn't have to pay that much that he thought he would pay. So everyone is happy. That's a compromise. But compromise is the very opposite of truth when you think about it. You did not get to the truth. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch talks about this and says that rabbinical courts should try to compromise because it's the peaceful thing to do. But if the litigant says, I don't want to compromise, I want the truth, you got to seek the truth. So compromise and truth are very two different things when you think about it. Moshe represent the truth. Truth means all the way to the end. Truth doesn't care about your feelings. What did they say, right? Today they have in politics, facts don't care about your feelings. Facts means truth. The truth is the truth. You got to pursue the truth till the end, no matter the consequences. That's Moshe's approach. Comes Aaron and says, Aaron is a man of peace. What is peace? Peace is the very opposite of truth. Peace is the very opposite of truth. Peace means compromise. You're bending a little bit. They tell the story, but Aaron himself, that he used to go around when he saw two people fighting, he would try to make peace between them. How did he make peace between them? How did he make peace? He would bend the truth a little bit. He would tell the guy that's fighting with him, you should know, I spoke to the other guy who wants to make peace with you. He's not happy about this fight. Oh, really? Okay, good. I also want to make peace. You go to the other guy and say, your uncle wants to make peace with you. And it wasn't true. No, you didn't speak to any of them beforehand. He made this up out of thin air. And he'd bring people together, between husband and wife, between the two friends. And this way he would make peace. He would bend the truth a little bit. Peace and truth are two very different things. Yet Moshe and Aaron lead the Jewish people through the 40 years of the desert. Those were the two leaders of the Jewish people. Moshe was the teacher of Torah. Aaron was the high priest. They led the Jewish people. And yet they were so different in what they represented. So here you have a case. Let's try to analyze this on a psychological level. He comes to Aaron and he sees that the goat was burned. He screams at him, "What'd you do? I told you that you're not to mourn today and to eat the sacrifices that you're supposed to eat." What does Aaron tell him? Let's try to analyze this from Moshe's perspective. He sees that the meat is burnt there, and he says, God told me to tell you that you are to eat this meat. Moshe in his own mind calculated, if this is true, that you're not an onan, you're not in mourning for the inauguration sacrifices, truth is truth for everything. If it's true for this, it's true for that. And therefore you shouldn't be an onan for the Rosh Chodesh goat either. And therefore he got very upset at him for burning the offering instead of eating it. Aaron tells him, hold on a minute, Moshe, my dear brother. People are not made up of, you don't press a button. People don't react that way. Truth sometimes is relative. What do I mean by relative? God forbid. Is truth relative? Relative truth is not truth. But what Aaron was trying to tell Moshe was, serving God is not about pressing buttons and I'm in or I'm out. People fluctuate with circumstances. Right when it comes to the inauguration, I feel elevated and I can overcome my grief and I can eat the sacrifices because God told me to do that. I can work myself up to that level. But I'm not so sure that we can do that when it comes to the sacrifice of the ongoing sacrifice. My happiness for the inauguration doesn't mean it's going to extend to everything else that day. It doesn't mean that I'm going to apply that excitement and that state of mind to everything else. I'm a human being. Human beings fluctuate. Our emotions fluctuate. What's true today is not necessarily my truth tomorrow. What's true for this is not necessarily my truth for that. I may be able to overcome my grief because God told me to with regard to the sacrifices of the inauguration, and that's enough to pull me up. But the regular daily offering, maybe that's not I'm not there. And Moshe concedes to him. What does Moshe concede? Does Moshe say that all of a sudden Aaron's attribute of peace overpowers his attribute of truth? Aaron was basically saying it's a compromise. This is yes and this not. We're somewhere in the middle, right? Correct? That's what he was basically telling him. What's true here doesn't mean it's true here. So Moshe concedes. Does that mean that Moshe gave up on his attribute of truth and he adapted suddenly the attribute of peace and compromise? The answer is no. The answer is much deeper than that. What Moshe learned that day, what ultimate truth really means. Let me explain. I want you to go with me on this. Let's take, for example, two human beings. You and me. We're two different people. We're completely different people. If I were to serve God and daven Shachris for 10 minutes, I've just said, put on tefillin and say the Shema. If I were to do that, would that be a true service for me? No, it wouldn't. Because I could do more. And I've been trained to do more. So when I compromise my ability, I'm not being truthful to myself. That's not true. That's not truthfulness. You understand what I'm saying? My truth is not necessarily your truth, and your truth is not necessarily my truth. What's true for you is not true for me. We're on two different levels. We're in two different realities. We're in two different circumstances. So let's say an uninitiated Jew who was not educated to daven Shachris every day for an hour or for 45 minutes. He doesn't know how to daven. He has never put on tefillin in his life. He doesn't know what tefillin is. He doesn't know even how to say the Shema. And he wakes up one day and says, Rabbi, I want to start serving God. Teach me how to put on tefillin. And I teach him how to put on tefillin. And he says, you know what are you supposed to do when you put on tefillin? I say the Shema. And he does that with sacrifice. He gives it all he's got to put on tefillin every day for 5-10 minutes. Is that a true service to God?
No.
Would you label that truth, or would you label that not truth?
Not true.
Why not?
It's not complete.
It's complete for you.
him.
For you, it's
That's right.
complete. That's the lesson that Moshe learned that day. Truth is not an all or nothing business. Truth is relative in the sense that every person has his or her truth. That doesn't mean you can compromise. I want to be very careful how this is understood and how this is articulated. That can be very easily misconstrued and misunderstood.
We're kind of using truth in a novel way here.
Right. The Alter Rebbe explains this in the 13th chapter of Tanya, when he talks about the difference between the fully righteous and the Beinoni. He says a Beinoni's truth is his truth. Even though if a tzaddik lived by the truth of a Beinoni, it would not be considered truth. If I were to put on tefillin and just say the Shema every day, I'd get punished, not rewarded, because I could do more. And that's not my truth, that's not my level. But someone that has never put on tefillin before, he doesn't even know what it is, and he suddenly, what is truth? Truth is, the Alter Rebbe says the word truth in Hebrew is, by the way, you know what the word truth in Hebrew is made up of, the which three letters? Emes. Aleph, the first letter, Mem, the very middle letter of the 22 alphabetical letters, and Tov, the last letter. The first letter, the last, and the middle letter. What is the meaning of this? Truth has to penetrate every letter, from beginning to end through the middle. In other words, what does this mean? That the truth has to be true in every circumstance. There is the truth of that circumstance, the truth of that level. What's the truth of a tzaddik? What's the truth of a person who has grown up to be living and learn and daven? His truth is that Shachris is from beginning to end. He has to do the whole thing, and if he doesn't, he's compromised his truth. If he just did the Shema, it would be the furthest thing from the truth for him, from his truth. Someone that was not initiated in the whole idea of Torah, mitzvahs, and tefillin and davening, and he suddenly one day wakes up and says, I want to become initiated, and he says, right, today, now I can do, the most I can do is 15 minutes, and he gives his whole 15 minutes, that is his truth. That's 100% true for him. For someone else it wouldn't be true. But for him it's true. That's what Aaron was telling Moshe. Yes, I'm not telling you that truth is not a contradiction to compromise, to peace. What Aaron was saying is, I'm making peace with the reality, with the circumstances that are on the table right now. Right now, I'm a mourner. When it comes to feel the inauguration of the temple, I overcame my mourning state because God told me I could, and I did. And I did everything that I'm supposed to do in the inauguration of the temple. But that doesn't carry over to the regular daily offerings that have nothing to do with the inauguration. Who says that I can extend this to here? You're saying that so simply because the truth is the truth everywhere. But it's not necessarily the case. And that's what Moshe learned that day. That truth is not relative in the sense that you can play around with the truth. God forbid. But every level has its truth. And I'm not at the level where I can extend the the joy of the unique circumstance of today to every day. I'm not there, and I can't do that. And I don't have to do that. And Moshe says, you know what, you're right. He says, I made a mistake. Because in the world of my truth, it's got to be true if it's true here, it's got to be true everywhere. And he was right from that perspective, from Moshe's standpoint. But not from the regular person. In other words, truth is that's what I mean by Aleph Mem Tov, that it extends, it goes from the top to the bottom. Every level has its center point, which the truth of that level. So the Alter Rebbe, for example, in Tanya explains it regarding the Tzaddik and the Beinoni. You know what the Tzaddik and the Beinoni are. The Tzaddik is the fully righteous, the Beinoni is the regular person. The Tzaddik is on fire all day long for God. He feels his passionate love for Hashem all the time. He never stops feeling a love for Hashem. A Beinoni, he does. When he davens, he feels a love for Hashem. When he's out in the street making a living, it dissipates. He doesn't feel that passionate love for Hashem. So are you going to say that the davening wasn't either real? If the tzaddik on his level would stop feeling a love for Hashem because he went out in the street, it wouldn't be that wouldn't be real for him. It wouldn't be considered truth, because a tzaddik's truth is that he feels a love for Hashem all the time. But a Beinoni is not at that level. He's a step lower. A Beinoni, when he davens, he feels a great love. That's the truth for him. That's his truth. That's the level where he's at, which is when you're davening, you feel this passionate love, but not all day long. We're not all at the level of a tzaddik. And the Alter Rebbe is saying that the Beinoni is a true servant of God. The fact that he's not, because when you say truth, truth has to penetrate all. It's not true. If it's true 10 o'clock, but 11 o'clock it's not true, then it wasn't true 10 o'clock either. That's the way people think about truth. It's got to be, if it's true 10, why is it not true 11? But at 10 o'clock I'm feeling passionate about God because I'm in the shul davening. 11 o'clock I'm selling shoes in the shoe store. That's my business. I don't feel this passionate love for Hashem.
But if a tzaddik...
So the tzaddik would lose, if the tzaddik went from feeling a love for Hashem, where he's supposed to feel that love all day, and suddenly doesn't feel it, it means he's not real. That service is not real. Because in other words, at his level, he's able to feel that love all day long. The Beinoni can't. He's not there. The soul is not at that high level. So when he's in davening, he can tune in and become part of that, but not in his regular day. That's not his reality. Truth is based on your reality, not a reality. That's what Aaron was telling Moshe. Truth is not an objective thing that it's true for everyone, every time, and every circumstance. It's not true. Truth is attached to circumstance. Truth could be subjective. In other words, my level right now demands that I should put on film 5 minutes a day. And that to me, you clap your hand if some people, it's a great sacrifice. And he really means it. What is truth? You give it all you got. You put yourself into it the way you can, as best as you can. That's your truth. And if you did that, then you're a true servant of God. If I were to do that, and daven for 5 minutes a day, just put on film and say the Shema, it would be false, not truth. Because my level demands from me much more. So that's what Aaron and Moshe were arguing over here. Moshe was saying if it's true for the inauguration, it should be true for our Wednesday morning too. If it's true always. And Aaron's saying, no, truth doesn't work that way. Truth is a circumstantial thing. It's subjective to you, to every single human being's circumstance and his position in life and where he is on a given day. And Moshe acquiesces to that. He says, I learned a new thing, not about compromise. I learned about peace. I learned a new truth about truth. I now learned what truth means. You're looking at me, you understand?
Yes, the first of Nisan, the inauguration was the first of Nisan, which is Rosh Chodesh.
Yeah.
And that's why Aaron burnt the offering for Rosh Chodesh, not for the inauguration.
Right. And he was saying to Moshe, my feelings of the inauguration have not extended to the regular day. Rosh Chodesh offering has nothing to do with the inauguration. That's a daily thing or a monthly thing. So you're asking me, you're telling me that if it's true here, it's got to be true here. No, not necessarily. This circumstance, it is true. For this circumstance, it's true. For that circumstance, it's not. Because I'm not a subjective. I'm not a person. You press a button and I feel emotion. I'm a human being with my personal level, my personal subjective circumstances, and where I am at the moment. That's my truth. And right now, God told me for this inauguration of the temple, I can be not an Einan, but it doesn't extend to everything else. And Moshe said, you know what, you're right. Truth is not an all or nothing game.
So if Moshe was wrong here, and he admitted it, he could be wrong in other things too. Not perfect.
Whenever he said he's wrong, he said he's wrong.
He could be wrong in a lot of things. If he's not always wrong.
And therefore,
I don't know. It's not perfect. I don't know what. I mean.
what is the point? So where are you going with that? Yeah.
Can't believe everything he says if he's not always right.
First of all, he didn't say anything wrong here too. He gave over the instruction of God. It was in the interpretation of what, and it was right away settled. That was the way it was when
Moses is not God. It's not an infinite, perfect being.
He is a pretty perfect being.
Pretty perfect, but
Yeah.
he's still in the process of. But God instructs.
He's not God, of course not.
God
No.
instructs him, and sometimes
Yeah, exactly.
he didn't.
That's the beauty of the Torah. That's the beauty of the Torah. The Torah points out immediately on an issue, which was
But
two
Moses
issues in the
doesn't
whole.
have infinite foreknowledge. Like when Moses is approaching the burning bush,
Yeah,
God says, "Stop, take off your shoes."
yeah.
Okay, he didn't have infinite foreknowledge. He still has to learn or take God's instruction.
Well, God revealed himself at the burning bush, and therefore he told him that he should take off his shoes because it's holy ground.
Right, but I'm saying, but
Did he know beforehand that was going to be a revelation, the moment? I don't know.
well, Moses. Based on the way you read it, Moses is perfected as he hears and then expresses as per God's instructions.
Right.
So, but he doesn't have infinite foreknowledge of what God is going to tell him, and that doesn't. And he's not necessarily infinitely wise with foreknowledge of all things of all times and places. Although he obviously has incredibly, he's very elevated and has mystical knowledge and so on and so forth.
In other words, what he's asking is, if he can make a mistake with regard to the goat of the Rosh Chodesh, then maybe he made a mistake in telling us to put on tefillin. Maybe God never told him to tell us that.
Oh, that's different.
If that's your point,
Right. Yeah.
obviously that's not correct, because in other words, in the Torah we have the one or two circumstances where there was an argument about it. He didn't make a mistake in the instruction that God gave him. He gave over the instruction 100%. He just thought that when God told him he's not supposed to mourn for these sacrifices, he deduced on his own that he shouldn't mourn for those sacrifices. And Aaron said, "I'm not so sure." And Moshe said, "You know what? You're right." But he didn't make up instructions. They're having an argument on a certain man. That's the beauty of the Torah. The Torah right away points it out and is not ashamed to record this argument and tell us that Moshe acquiesced to Aaron. But God forbid that we should deduce from this that Moshe just came down the mountain and made up stories, or even mistakenly gave over an instruction. He didn't give it over a mistaken instruction here either. He gave it exactly the way God told it to him. He just deduced from this and the Torah right away puts it straight. The Torah right away corrects it. That's the beauty of it.
Your example from the 13th chapter of the Tanya, that the truth can be subjective because human truth can be subjective because it's subjected. It is subject to the capabilities and the spiritual development of the individual. So I have just this question. You gave the example of the tzaddik. Okay, so if the characteristic of the tzaddik is to be constantly on fire for God, constantly aware, but if he was to go to the street, per your example, and for whatever reason not feel that awareness of fire for God, would he still be a tzaddik in that moment?
If what?
If the tzaddik goes to the street, and for whatever reason in that moment, per your example, the 13th chapter of Tanya, loses his fire for God and that awareness of God, at that moment, is he still a tzaddik?
No, not
If
only
that's the
that.
case,
No,
wait.
it's much more than that.
But
It
if
means
that's
that in the
true-
earlier moment he wasn't either. That's the point.
You mean he never was a tzaddik?
In other words, if he's not living the tzaddik ideal, then he's not a tzaddik. Not today and not yesterday. A tzaddik is a
So
tzaddik all the time, not
tzaddik's
half the
okay,
time.
So that's
Yeah.
an absolute. Tzaddik's
And the Beinani is also an absolute Beinani all the time. What is the level of a Beinani? That when he's davening, he's on fire. And if today he's on fire and tomorrow he's not when he's davening, then he's not a Beinani. He's just a regular person. In other words, the truth of a Beinani is that this is not a class on Tanya. So I brought it as an example that the Alter Rebbe said that emes emes meaning truth is on every level. It has its truth. Every level has its truth. So the Beinani's truth is what? That when he davens, to make it simplified, that when he davens, his Yetzer Hara is closed down. That's the Beinani. When he davens, his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination is asleep. It doesn't bother him. If that's not true every day, then he's not the Beinani. Then it's not a true Beinani. Because that's the truth of a Beinani. So if it's not happening, then he's not there. But the truth of a tzaddik is that his Yetzer Hara is always asleep. Never, it doesn't bother him anymore at all because he's on fire for Hashem all the time. What causes your evil inclination to be shut down? Your passionate love for Hashem. The Beinani is meant to experience that passionate love during davening. And if he doesn't, if there were some days yes, some days not, then he's not a Beinani. That's the truth of a Beinani. So you're saying, but a Beinani, you say his love for Hashem is shut down 2 hours later. That means the love of when he was davening wasn't real. No, the Alter Rebbe says not. The truth of a Beinani, in other words, that level of truth is real for him. That's the level of a Beinani, that when he's on davening, he's on fire, but later he's not on fire. That's the level of a Beinani, and therefore, when he's davening and he's on fire, that's true. That's a real experience for a Beinani. Because the truth of a Beinani is that. But for a tzaddik who's expected more, tzaddik means that he's always on fire for Hashem. And therefore his Yetzer Hara is always shut down. Or sometimes they even got rid of the Yetzer Hara. And suddenly a week later he feels the urge to do a sin. He's not a tzaddik. That means then he wasn't either a tzaddik. A week ago he wasn't either. Because emes has to be truth all the time. Your truth, the truth of this level has to be true all the time for that level.
Are tzaddiks born and not made?
He's made, he makes it, he has the potential, but he has to work on it.
But that means, if that's the case, if your tzaddik is made,
What do you mean
there
made?
must have been a point when he was not a tzaddik.
He had the potential. Yeah. No, he wasn't always a tzaddik. True.
Okay, so then,
But not everyone has the potential to be a tzaddik. That's the point.
I understand. I'm just saying,
But he wasn't born a tzaddik. Not all tzaddikim are born tzaddikim. They have to work
What
on
does the
it.
word mean, tzaddik? I don't-
Righteous.
Oh, righteous? Oh,
completely righteous.
How many tzaddik are there in the world?
Not that many.
I mean,
Real
loving- loving-
Real tzaddiks, not that many.
What's it, the 11?
The 36 tzaddikim. Let's not get carried away with that right now. The point, I just want to come back to Moshe and Aaron. These two attitudes of truth and peace are not a contradiction. Not a contradiction. So what does Moshe and Aaron bring to the Jewish people in their leadership skills and qualities? Moshe is the man of truth. He teaches us the paradigm that truth is absolute. Aaron comes and says it's absolute in every single person's circumstance. In every person's subjective reality, it's got to be absolute in that subjective reality. In other words, again, back to the example of a Jew that's never put on tefillin before, never davened and never learned and did anything Jewish, and he's suddenly inspired to become a little better and a lot better. And he's taking it step by step because that's what humans do. And he starts davening. And he makes it for 10 minutes a day. That's what he can give. And he gives it all. He's got that level. It's true. If he's at 10 minutes a day, then he's at 10 minutes a day. He gave all he's got in those 10 minutes. That's a true servant. But if in a week later he falls down to 5 minutes, then you got to question whether he was true yesterday also. Because maybe he wasn't really there yesterday either.
So, Rabbi, let me...
So that's the point of it. I just want to finish up in your last. The point is that Moshe and Aaron complement each other. Moshe gives the paradigm of truth, and Aaron qualifies it. And in other words, manifests that truth on different levels. Aaron is the person who finds every person in his circumstance and teaches him Moshe's truth for that circumstance. To your level. He tailors it to where you are. And in your level, that's absolute true service. And that's why they're both leaders of the Jewish people. You can't have one without the other. Moshe has to give the paradigm of truth, and Aaron is the one that applies it to every single level individually. And together we have Torah and mitzvahs, and we have shalom, we have compromise, we have peace, and we have truth. And they're never a contradiction to each other. Yeah.
But I wanted to say, then Aaron would represent me more so than Moshe.
Moshe and Aaron together represent you. Yeah.
Right, but more so Aaron would understand me.
That's right. He brings
better.
Moshe's truth to your level.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. That's what he does.
Right.
But without Moshe, Aaron wouldn't be able to do anything.
Because I come in that category.
We all do.
Well, yeah, but you're very religious.
Yeah, but I can be more.
I can't daven, but I come here.
You're right.
You know.
So when you put on tefillin every day, that's true for your level.
And that makes me feel good.
That's true.
Really. Even when I walk in here, I feel a little better in a shul.
Here's what it is. What Aaron does, he brings Moshe's truth and he applies it to Arthur Worth. How is he going to apply it to your level? That's the skill of Aaron. That's why everyone got along with him. Because he was able to take the truth of Moshe and bring it to every single circumstance. And say, you know what, your truth today and tomorrow in your level, this is your truth.
But, see, Rabbi,
But he doesn't compromise the truth. God forbid to compromise the truth. He makes it real to your level. It's not a compromise. You understand? That's not a compromise.
But like I was telling you, when I put the tefillin on, it does make me feel good. Really. Even though I don't daven. And there's nothing I can do about that. So I made a compromise to myself to put tefillin on and get closer that way.
And what Aaron taught Moshe that day is that it's not not really a compromise.
Right.
If it's a compromise that is bringing the truth down to your level.
But
Let me take this call.
Also, Rabbi, I do feel that I'm very Jewish even
100%.
without davening.
I'm going to end the class. Thank you, everyone, for watching. All the best. We'll see you next week.